Hello, all my duckies out there. I'm Duuz-Diz-Din coming at you with another DuckTales 2017 episode review. This time it's season 2's episode 14 titled Friendship Hates Magic. A nice little allusion to My Little Pony, I feel. Although honestly, to a certain degree, it has some relation to that, but it's an interesting relation. As we see Webby going to the public library, namely to continue doing research on the Shadow Realm, in reference to trying to get Lena back finally. We then see Lena is in fact in the Shadow Realm because she lost that Yu-Gi-Oh duel. Because of the events of the finale of the Shadow War. And this is our first appearance by Lena in since the last season, the end of last season. It just took us half a season to get her. Isn't that nice? So Lena is now been observing Webby ever since then, just kind of keeping note of her daily routine. We also see that Miss Quackfester is actually working part-time as a librarian in order to pay for her retirement. And because Lena wants to check out a specific book, Miss Quackfester lets her know that it's already actually been checked out by someone else. Namely, a new character named Violet Saberwing, which is actually the title of a specific form of hummingbird. And when Webby goes in order to greet Violet and get to know her for the most part, and hopefully gain the book, as she feels that maybe Violet won't know how to read it, Violet shows off that she actually does know the specific languages, showing that someone else also knows very obscure different forms of languages rather other than just Webby herself. But as soon as Violet finds out who Webby is, she realizes that Webby is part of the McDuck family for the most part, and is involved in all the weird goings on in Duckburg, which Violet very much wants to know more about. Although Lena has various reservations to Violet because she sees a little too much of herself in Violet as a whole. But Webby's just all too happy to have once again gotten a sleepover friend for the most part, as Violet offers to come to Webby's house and help her decode that specific book that she has. Meanwhile, the B plot is about Miss Beakley, having a nice refreshing day since all Scrooge and the boys are at the bin cataloging various items, which was always the boys' job at the bin in order to basically earn their keep. Just cataloging all of Scrooge's bin items for the most part. However, in comes Webby to tell her grandma about the fact that she's made a new friend. And while Miss Beakley is actually trying to encourage Webby by saying that it's been a while since the events with Lena, it's good to see that you're finally getting back into the swing of things, despite the fact that so many other sleepovers you've had have ended in magical disaster. And hearing that, Webby immediately thinks that what she needs to do in order to keep Violet as a friend is hide all of the magical artifacts, despite the fact that that's exactly what Violet is coming to the mansion to see. Whereas Lena is just a little too, still does not trust Violet. She doesn't believe that she's actually trying to become Webby's friend. Meanwhile, as Webby tries to hide the various magical artifacts, Miss Beakley tells her to just try to be herself. That's the best thing to do in order to keep friends. But Webby doesn't quite believe Beakley because of the fact that Beakley doesn't seem to have any real friends of her own. And determined to prove her granddaughter wrong, Beakley decides that she wants to spend the day with Launchpad, the only other person with a pulse and the ability to speak, for the most part, that's still around. So she decides to spend the day with Launchpad, which is fun in and of itself. But Webby hides all of her magical artifacts, but then notices that as Violet has arrived, Duckworth is going to the door to answer it, so Webby ends up drop kicking him, which naturally just kind of enrages Duckworth for the most part. But Webby kind of plays things off, tries to play it very cool in order to greet Violet into her house. Meanwhile, we see Launchpad's conundrum is a far more grave one, as he doesn't know which soup spoon to choose, so he ends up trying to suck it through a straw only to choke, as Miss Beakley looks on in exasperation for the most part. But Violet is introduced to Webby's room, which, because of Webby stowing away all of the magical stuff within, it just kind of looks like a very sparse room that Webby doesn't own much. But, Violet starts to go over the contents of a book and goes over the shadow creatures, doppelganger people who feed off of negative emotions and grow because of it. However, Webby tries to subvert any talk of magic, as she feels that it'll lead to her slumber party's downfall. She wants to subvert it and just go into a different game. But Violet is not taking no for an answer, and then requests to know what Webby knows about the Shadow War. And what Webby knows about Magica Dispel, which immediately sets Lena off, believing that Violet is up to no good. But Webby just decides that it's time for a makeover, but then Lena notices a glowing object in Violet's bag, namely Magica's amulet, the amulet that Lena had for most of the first season, and she wants to use that opportunity to tell Webby about it, but we then notice that a ghostly hand is reaching out within the Shadow Realm. And as Webby and Violet create this kind of monster makeup goings on, Webby accidentally lets slip that all of her magical items are up in the attic, which immediately sends Violet racing after it just to see. But Webby, is surprised to see that Violet isn't creeped out by any of it. No, Violet is very much intrigued by all of the goings on there, and even noticing this ectoplasmic pulse from Webby's friendship bracelet she got from Lena, which, ties them together in a very interesting way, and is basically what keeps Lena in this plane of existence for the most part. But Webby goes on to say that it's a belonging of an old friend of hers who is, for the most part, gone now. But as Webby looks on and still continues to grow in her distrust of Violet, shadows start to move within the attic. And as, Violet and Webby come to a compromise on what game they should play, Lena realizes that she can use these, runes in order to get in contact with Webby for the most part. Meanwhile, Mrs. Beakley and Launchpad are having a heart-to-heart because Launchpad feels that he's about to get fired, basically, and that's why they haven't brought him inside yet. That's why they haven't that's why he's been brought inside in order to just kind of, have this little moment with Miss Beakley, but Beakley assures him that it's just to kind of bond for the most part. Kind of got off track there. But, Miss Beakley's basically reading this story about the Scarlet Pimpernel, which Launchpad immediately likens to Darkwing, and once Miss Beakley lets it known that she doesn't know who Darkwing Duck is, as any good fan would do, Launchpad is all too ready to educate Miss Beakley. And, I love this kind of reference we see here, whereas this Zorro-like character, or the Scarlet Pimpernel-like character, I guess you could say, that you see must have been the inspiration for Darkwing, very much like how the Scarlet Pimpernel and Zorro were inspirations for Batman. That's nice little, real world adjacency for the most part. However, once Lena Once Webby and Violet get ready for their seance for the most part, Lena's in disbelief as to if it'll actually work, only for her to knock over the runes herself, and she tries to spell out "Don't trust her." However, Webby and Violet don't really notice the spelling and continue on with their seance, which seems to summon all these shadowy creatures. Lena tries to scare them away from it and get them to stop, but this just causes them to want to, fight back and, summon these creatures even harder. And once Violet is knocked away towards the amulet she has, she uses it to blast away Lena, kind of banishing her for the most part, as Webby finally manages to get a glimpse of her friend. And once she realizes what's going on and sees Violet with Magica's amulet, she immediately goes on the warpath, demanding to know where Violet got that amulet. Violet simply explains that she got it from the beach, and up until that point, she had always been one of book smarts and, never accepting things like the mystic. But once that day had come and the Shadow War had ended, Magica's amulet had landed before her, and she became curious about the supernatural as a whole. And she felt that it was a way of just getting out there because she had been sheltered for most of her life. She hadn't really, done anything that she truly wanted to do. And while Webby does kind of naturally relates to this, Lena still does not trust Violet. But then Violet says that she might have a way of bringing Lena back. Although Lena still does not feel that this is the best course of action, Webby is all too willing to get her best friend back. We then see a straight up episode of Darkwing Duck, which is based off of the episode The Haunting of Mr. Banana Brain, Quackerjack's little puppet pal that ended up being possessed by this, ghostly figure, Paddywhack, which was a whole thing. But, it's just really nice to see these situations that Darkwing used to get himself into. And while Launchpad is all too happy to, share some exposition to Miss Beakley, it's obvious Miss Beakley isn't really buying into the hype. And as Violet and Webby continue on with their seance, Lena just does not feel that this is the best course of action. Even when the amulet flies into Lena, she then notices that Magica's form is forming out of the shadow creatures and starts to form around Violet and Webby. This causes Lena to just pull them into the shadow world by mistake for the most part. And though Webby is all too happy to have finally found her friend again, Violet lets it known that the shadows seem to be attacking. But Webby disregards this and wants to introduce her old friend to her new friend. But Lena still does not trust Violet as she sees too much of her old self within Violet. But this, bit of jealousy, this bit of rage kind of manifests in the shadow creatures who, as if on cue, haul off with Webby. And as Violet and Lena go chasing after him, Lena continues to try to blame Violet for the shadows just, rising like this. But Violet simply says that they transformed into her form because of her possessiveness and her jealousy. In the book, that's what these creatures were. They responded to Lena's emotions. Meanwhile, speaking of emotions, Miss Beakley and Launchpad are thrilled with what is the final episode of Darkwing Duck. And in order to keep it going, Launchpad, shows Miss Beakley his fan script idea, which Miss Beakley immediately wants to film, having become an official fan of Darkwing Duck. And speaking of becoming your biggest fan, it says poor transitioning, Lena and Violet decide to put their differences aside and team up and cast basically a spell in order to get Webby back and banish the shadows. Unfortunately, this also starts to banish Lena as well from this plane and from their vision. However, as they all hold hands to basically wish Lena a fond farewell, Webby's bracelet starts to react to it, her first bit of magic, and because of this, Lena is able to maintain a corporeal form. And the three new friends hug it out, having been glad that they were successful in bringing Lena back. However, we then see that Launchpad and Miss Beakley are all too ready to start up their Darkwing Duck fan film for the most part. And who knows where that will take them, considering the next episode or so. But as they continue on with the sleepover, Lena lets Webby know that she's basically been watching her this entire time, and while Webby isn't too freaked out by that, she is freaked out when Violet and Lena team up to give her a bit of a fright, which Webby is all too happy with because she has gotten, not just an old friend, but a new friend, and all within the same day. And I gotta tell you, I was taken aback because after watching this, I finally realized, man, Webby has just become this character who I love seeing. And, my memories of the old DuckTales series are very sparse. I just remember that I was never a big fan of Webby, as most people weren't. But, she was always kind of too grating for me. She was just the tag-along girl for the most part, which was not the best position to be in. But here, she's just such a commanding presence, and I love seeing her happy in her adventure, and to just do the things she does. The crew has done such a great job of really fleshing out her personality, whether it be Rachel Vine's writing or Matthew Humphrey's directing that really just sold this episode. It's a fun time, and now Webby has her own trio besides Huey, Dewey, and Louie to hang out with, be a part of for the most part, and she can do whatever she wants to do. We could have full-on Webby, Lena, and Violet-centric episodes now, and I think that would be loads of fun just to see them going on magical quests and stuff. But it does bring up, will we see Magica again in the story proper? What will happen to Lena from here on going forward? Will she go back to her old room at the, docks? Will she live there from now on? Or what? Will she be adopted for the most part by the McDuck family to a certain degree? Because that was always seemed to be an option that Scrooge had put out there towards the beginning of the Shadow War before Lena got pulled into Magica's shadow. And now that Magica's shadow has gained this corporeal form, does that mean Magica doesn't have a shadow of her own? Or does she? The logistics of some of this just don't quite add up, but I still loved it regardless. It's just me nitpicking at this point, but tell me your thoughts in the comment section below. Are you satisfied with this being the way that Lena was brought back, or do you feel that it should have been something involving Magica, or something that went off over time and was put on a bit of a slow burn? And if you like this review, feel free to leave me a like. If you didn't, feel free to leave me a dislike and tell me what I did wrong in the comment section below. And subscribe and hit the bell icon. That way you never miss another DuckTales episode review. And if you want to find me on social media, just Google Duuz-Diz-Din. I am everywhere, for better or for worse. And until the next video, just remember that the true magic will always be friendship. My little pony, my little pony.